There is a coastline in America that by every rule of geography should not exist. 3,000 miles of raw Atlantic edge crammed into one of the smallest states in the country. More than California, more than any state that barely knows it exists. A number that took 10,000 years to earn. Not all of it peacefully. There are over 60 lighthouses still standing on this coastline because these rocks have been swallowing sailors for centuries, and at some point someone had to do something about it. One of them is so isolated that its last keeper refused to leave even after his job no longer existed. The lobster industry here is worth over $1 billion a year. But for how long? The lobsters are already moving north, following colder water, and the most valuable fishery in American history may be quietly relocating to Canada. But something is coming in return. The Gulf of Maine is warming faster than almost any ocean on Earth, and the whales know it. The sea is changing. Not everything it brings is a loss. In the northern woods, the tracks of the Eagle Lake Railroad are still there, rusting into the forest floor. They built it to move wood, but when the wood ran out, they left, and let the trees grow back around it. And at the summit of Katahdin, the Appalachian Trail ends. Thousands of miles of wilderness, and Maine is where it stops. If the trail ends here, what exactly is on the other side? Despite its modest size, Bar Harbor punches far above its weight in history, mystery, and sheer weirdness. The town used to be called Eden, and someone somewhere looked at paradise and said, "No, let's rename it." At low tide, a sandbar rises out of the ocean, and you can literally walk from the mainland to a separate island on foot. It sounds crazy, but the ocean just moves out of your way, like it's opening a door. The town's permanent population is roughly 5,200 people, yet cruise ships were bringing so many tourists daily that residents held an official vote to put a hard cap on arrivals. This happened because their own town had become too crowded for them to live in. The cold waters don't only attract tourists, they bring in some of the most spectacular creatures, the humpback whales. They feed so close to shore that the town has become one of the top whale watching spots on the entire east coast. These giants show up every single season, and here is just one stop on a jaw-dropping round trip they complete every single year. Their song can travel across thousands of miles of ocean, meaning a melody that started off Bar Harbor could eventually be sung by a whale on the other side of the Atlantic, without either of them moving an inch. Humpbacks run their hunts like a military operation. Every whale has a role, and they execute it in perfect sync with near strangers. I am saying near strangers because their friendships are loose and short-lived. They don't form tight, permanent groups like dolphins or orcas. Even calves leave their mothers, and once they separated, there is no evidence they ever recognise or seek each other out again. With a far darker story is the North Atlantic right whale, one of the most endangered animals on Earth. Sadly, there are fewer individuals left than there are people living on a single street in this town. These stories are happening all at once in the same waters that run along the edge of Acadia National Park. This is the oldest national park east of the Mississippi, and somehow almost nobody outside the region truly knows its value, while Yellowstone gets all the credit. It was almost entirely donated by wealthy private landowners who bought up the land themselves and handed it over because they didn't trust developers to leave it alone. The whole park sits on an island created entirely by glaciers, leaving behind the dramatic granite landforms and ocean inlets. The highest point on the North Atlantic seaboard is the Cadillac Mountain, and from October through early March, it is the first place in the country where the sun rises every single morning. Most visitors who drive to the top of the mountain never actually reach the true summit. The real highest point is a short walk behind the gift shop, marked only by a tiny survey marker on a bare rock that almost nobody stops to find. The most visited mountain in the area has been quietly fooling its own visitors for decades. Lower and deeper is Jordan Pond, a glacial pond flanked by the Bubbles, twin rounded peaks named for their shape. At 150 feet deep, it is the deepest lake on the entire island, with water so clear you can see straight to the bottom. The Bubbles are not natural mountain peaks. They are giant mounds of glacial debris dumped there by a retreating glacier, which is exactly why they look so oddly smooth and round compared to everything else in the reserve. Right along the coastline of Acadia, the common eider are nesting. They were once hunted so heavily in Maine that it nearly vanished from the region entirely. They came back, but current populations are once again declining, making every flock more fragile than it looks. The only lighthouse on the entire island, and having one of the smaller towers on the Maine coast, is Bass Harbour Head Lighthouse. It sits so high on a sheer rocky cliff that the light still reaches 56 feet above the waterline, doing the job of a much taller structure without actually being one. One of the most photographed lighthouses in New England had someone's family living inside it, until just a few years ago, because it was only transferred to the National Park Service in 2020, having residential use for over 150 years. While the lighthouse guards one end of the island, the other end has the forgotten estate of the man who built this park with his own fortune. But George B. Dorr, known as the father of Acadia, spent almost his entire personal fortune there, buying up land piece by piece and donating it to the public. He believed his wealth would never run out, but it did, and he died nearly broke doing it. The land at Compass Harbour was the Dorr family's summer home, but for George, it eventually became the place he never truly left. Falling in love with a piece of coastline as a teenager and spending the rest of your life and fortune protecting it is one of the most committed things any person has ever done for a place. Follow the coastline south, and eventually the ocean stops being peaceful. At Thunderhole, the ocean has no choice but to go up when the water reaches the narrow crack in the coastal rock, making you take a step back. The spray can shoot over 40 feet into the air, but most visitors who show up see absolutely nothing because they arrive at the wrong time. The whole event is entirely tide dependent, and a calm, low tide makes it look like a completely ordinary puddle in the rocks. Thunderhole is the ocean forcing its way into the rock. A few miles inland is Sums Sound, the only natural fjord on the entire east coast. It technically doesn't have all the characteristics of a true Norwegian fjord, so geologists now classify it as a fjord, a shallower glacial embayment, making it the only one of those on the eastern seaboard instead. Being the only fjord on the east coast sounds better, but being the only fjord is arguably more unique. Sums Sound splits the island into two completely different worlds, the east side with the crowds, the cruise ships and the Park Loop Road, and the west side, simply called the quiet side, where most tourists don't bother to go. But the wildest and least visited corner of Acadia isn't on Mount Desert Island at all. Islaho is miles offshore, and the only way to get there is a small ferry from Stonington that doubles as the island's mail and supply boat. The National Park Service deliberately limits the number of visitors allowed each day, not because of any law, but because the island simply cannot handle more people without losing the thing that makes it worth visiting in the first place. The lighthouse here was the very last one built in Maine. When the keeper's house was no longer needed, the government sold it off during the Great Depression, and it has been a small inn ever since. Beyond Islaho's wild seclusion, the sea leads to York, colonial charm and golden beaches along Cape Kennebec. It holds a title that shocks most people. It became the very first chartered city on the continent. But being first didn't save it. One winter dawn, over 100 attackers arrived on snowshoes, burned the town, took captives, and left scars, yet it rebuilt into one of Maine's most beloved coastal destinations. Here, the beaches stretches wide, broader than a football field, then disappears again as the tide returns. Watching over it all is Nubble Lighthouse, perched on its rocky island like a stubborn guard against the crashing swells. It sits so close to shore you could almost toss a stone to it, yet fierce tides keep it apart, like trying to hug your neighbour across a wild river. There's no bridge to reach it. Keepers and their families once lived completely cut off from the mainland, swinging across on a small boat pulley just to get groceries. NASA even included an image of Nubble in the Voyager spacecraft's golden record, sending this little Maine lighthouse as one of humanity's greetings to the universe. Storms tore the original foghorn away, leaving keepers to bellow warnings into the wind, yet the tower sways but never falls against towering waves. From here, imagine chugging along forgotten tracks to Eagle Lake and West Branch Railroad, where rusting rails whisper tales of old steam dreams. This line wasn't built for passengers. It existed solely to haul massive logs out of one of the most remote forests in the eastern United States. Logs floated across the lake by steamboat, then transferred onto rail cars to finish the journey to the river, a perfectly coordinated relay of wood and water through trackless forest. When the timber ran out, the entire operation was abandoned in place. Locomotives, rails, and equipment left exactly where they stopped. When the timber ran out, the entire operation was abandoned in place, leaving rails, cars, and equipment quietly among the trees. Moss crawls over steel, and trees poke through old lines, slowly reclaiming the iron and wood. That same quiet power of preservation leads us next to Fort McClary, where history was shaped not by timber, but by the very real fear of invasion. Surprisingly, this was actually built to protect a harbour in New Hampshire, guarding its neighbour's coastline as much as its own. It kept changing shape as stronger weapons appeared, each rebuild turning it into a tougher, more capable version of itself. Thick rooms once held cannons and gunpowder to guard the harbour, with walls and openings letting defenders fire safely from behind stone. Now grass covers the old defences and seabirds glide overhead, turning a once tense military outpost into a peaceful coastal stop. Following the rocky shoreline farther along, another coastal guide soon rises above the waves, Pemaquid Point Lighthouse. The rocks beneath it are among the East Coast's most twisted formations, squeezed and warped by forces so powerful, geologists still study them as a real-world classroom. Believe it or not, this lighthouse was destroyed and rebuilt twice before the current structure finally held against the Atlantic. Its image was chosen for the Maine state quarter, printed into the pockets of Americans who may never have visited in person. Storms here don't gently lap at the shore. Waves regularly explode over the bare rock ledges with enough force to send spray flying past the lighthouse itself. Those same dramatic ledges claimed countless ships over the centuries, which is exactly why the lighthouse was built here in the first place. As Pemaquid Point Lighthouse stands guard over the Atlantic, the nearby village of New Harbour unfolds just beyond the rocky point. People have lived around this harbour long before Europeans arrived and began settling the shoreline. The houses here are classic salt box and clapboard style, simple, sturdy, and painted white against the grey sea, built to survive weather first and look pretty second. It is a working lobster village to its bones. Trap buoys crowd the water, weathered boats leave before dawn, and the smell of salt water and bait is simply part of daily life here. That same lobstering life carries out to sea, where Vinalhaven has run its own tight-knit fishing community entirely on island time. The village looks straight from a postcard. Wooden houses, lobster traps by the docks, and boats bobbing in a harbour largely unchanged for over a century. But before that, the island was literally building America. Its granite went into the Brooklyn Bridge, the State Department building, and some of New York City's most iconic structures. At its peak, the quarries drew workers from other countries, all coming to split rock on a small island in the bay. When the quarries were abandoned, they filled with water, and locals turned them into swimming holes, possibly the best second act any industrial pit has had. And in that same cold grey water surrounding the island, one of Maine's most beloved wild residents quietly calls these swells home, the harbour seal. They look exactly like a Labrador retriever that decided to move into the ocean with a round head, big curious eyes, and no sense of personal space around kayakers. Pups can swim and dive within hours of being born, plunging straight into the cold Atlantic, as if it were perfectly normal. Mating happens entirely underwater, where males blow bubbles, perform vocal shows, and display their diving skills, essentially running an invisible talent show beneath the surface. On the rocks, they pile together, not for warmth or friendship. More eyes mean predators are spotted sooner, and each extra seal slightly lowers the chance of being taken. Sadly, the very fishing industry that defines this coastline is also one of the biggest threats to seals here. Nets entangle them silently, and many never make it back to the surface. The seals aren't the only ones working these waters. Just beyond the rocks, lobster fishing quietly drives the entire economy of this coastline, one trap at a time. Maine produces more lobster than anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere, with most coming from these cold, rocky waters. Harvesting follows an unwritten code, with territories passed down through families for generations, invisible to outsiders but fiercely respected by those who work here. These shellfish were once so abundant, they washed up on shore in piles, considered poor people's food, and fed to prisoners who eventually complained about eating it too often. Its rise from humble fare to one of the priciest dishes on any menu is one of the greatest comeback stories in culinary history. The coast eventually gives way to thick forest, and buried inside it, Katahdin ironworks once ran just as hard as its fishing ones. Someone looked at this roadless patch of forest and thought, let's build a full iron smelting operation here. And somehow people actually showed up. To keep the furnace roaring, workers stripped the surrounding forest bare for charcoal fuel, ironically tearing down the very trees they relied on to survive. At its peak, a whole town sprang up around that single furnace. Houses, a store, a school, a complete community in the middle of nowhere. But the iron produced here was low quality, and that problem alone doomed the operation before it ever truly got rolling. When the works shut down, the town disappeared almost overnight. Families left, buildings emptied, and the forest quietly crept back in, covering nearly every trace. The most haunting sight today isn't just the ruined furnace stack still standing among the trees. It's imagining an entire community vanished so completely that most people don't even know it existed. The ironworks may be gone, but the forest saved its best trick for last. Gulf Haygaz, a 400-foot slate gorge hiding quietly beneath the trees just beyond the ruins. Often called Maine's own Grand Canyon, it appears almost without warning. One moment you're walking through flat woodland, the next the ground drops away to a roaring river far below. Over time, the restless river carved the chasm by slicing through solid slate and plunging through a chain of waterfalls, including a stretch locals call the Jaws. It is exactly what it sounds like. The walls squeeze so close together, you could nearly reach out and touch both sides at once. Long before hikers arrived, loggers used the gorge as a timber highway, sending huge trunks through rapids and whirlpools because it was the only route. From this hidden canyon carved by water, the forest unfolds towards something far wider and far calmer. Moosehead Lake, the largest lake in all of New England. Surprisingly, it sits in one of the region's most remote corners, more untouched than most expect a lake here to be. The lake is ringed by unbroken forest, as far as the eye can see. No cities, no suburbs, just trees, water, and the occasional moose standing at the shoreline like it owns the place. It's so massive that it creates its own weather, with storms forming on the surface and hitting without warning. Moose far outnumber people here, treating the shoreline like a personal dining room, one of the densest populations anywhere on the continent. The lake's name comes from a Native American legend about a warrior named Gabe who killed a giant cow moose, and English settlers simply borrowed it. Interestingly, Mount Kineo on the shore also resembles a moose's head from certain angles, making the name feel even more fitting. Beyond its shape, the real wonder is the rock. The island holds the largest volcanic rhyolite deposit, a sharp, hard stone once used continent-wide for arrowheads and tools. The cliffs on the east face drop almost straight into the lake, with no trail or warning, so sheer and sudden that even experienced hikers steer well clear. Today, the mountain hosts a golf course at its base, so you can tee off with an 800-foot cliff staring directly down at you. A resort hotel once stood here, but burned down twice, as if the mountain itself had strong opinions about becoming a tourist destination. Access remains deliberately limited. No road, no bridge, only open lake water between you and this geologically remarkable landmark. In winter, when the lake freezes, snowmobilers race across the ice to reach the mountain, turning the open water that blocks summer visitors into a frozen highway. Down at the water's edge, the moose that inspired this lake's name still show up on schedule. It isn't just a big deer, it's the largest member of the deer family, tall enough to look most people directly in the eye while standing on all fours. Those long, awkward-looking legs aren't clumsy. They push through winter snow and wade through lake shallows in summer without breaking stride. Even more surprising, moose actively dive underwater to graze on plants growing on the lake floor. During mating season, bulls grow and shed a full set of antlers every year, and occasionally two males lock antlers so tightly that neither can pull free. Consumed by the need to compete, they barely eat for weeks, burning fat reserves so aggressively that the strongest often enter winter dangerously thin. One of the biggest threats isn't predators, but ticks and parasites, which drain blood, damage nervous systems, and have already sharply reduced the moose population. But the moose share this lake with another creature entirely, one far smaller, far louder after dark, and impossible to ignore once you've heard it: the common loon. Unlike most birds, they have solid bones instead of hollow ones, giving them precise dives but making takeoff from water look like a controlled crash. To hunt, a loon dips its head below the surface to spot prey, then dives and chases fish using only its powerful feet. No wings, just speed and direction. Their haunting, human-like calls carry across Moosehead Lake at night, creating a sound early settlers genuinely believed was supernatural. The loons call through the night, but the journey continues south along the coast to where hills meet the harbour in one of Maine's most picture-perfect towns. Camden is one of the few places in the world where mountains drop straight down to a working harbour filled with sailboats. The harbour itself is lined with white steepled churches and wooden storefronts, the kind of place that looks like someone painted it. That dramatic setting turned the town into a shipbuilding powerhouse, where its yards launched the first six-masted schooner ever built, a vessel so large many believed it impossible. A devastating fire once destroyed the entire business district, but Camden quickly rebuilt in brick and stone, creating the historic streets that still stand today. In autumn, the hills above town blaze red and orange, reflecting across the harbour in a scene so photogenic, Camden often tops lists of the country's most beautiful towns. High above it all, Mount Battie rises, where the view across Penobscot Bay stretches farther than most visitors expect. The summit is open and bare rock, no trees blocking the sight, just wind, sky and a panorama of islands, ocean and distant forest. During fall, the hillsides below blaze with red, orange and gold, reflecting off the harbour water far beneath. Mount Battie is one peak in a larger stretch of protected hills, and Camden Hills State Park extends beyond it, with trails, forests and coastline most visitors never see. Every path and road here was carved by hand during the Great Depression, young men using shovels and axes to shape the forest from scratch. The geology is equally astonishing. These ridges were thrust upward when Africa collided with North America, creating the very ground hikers tread today. Even crazier, the rock beneath your feet was once buried under a mile of additional stone, now completely eroded away. Hidden inside the park are patches of old-growth forest that show what the state looked like before logging changed everything. Where the hills finally end, a small lighthouse stands, Curtis Island Lighthouse, at the mouth of Camden Harbour, where the forest meets open water. It's one of the tiniest along the coast, easy to miss from shore, yet essential for vessels navigating the harbour in rough weather. The island is so compact that the lighthouse, keeper's house, and one outbuilding fill nearly every inch, like fitting a full household into a large backyard. Camden eventually took ownership, turning the island into a public green space where anyone willing to paddle out can picnic under the same trees that once shaded keepers. Like most lighthouses, Curtis Island was automated, ending daily routines and the seasonal lives of families who packed up and never returned. Continuing down the coast, Port Clyde remains a working fishing village, holding fast to the way it has lived for generations. Small enough to almost vanish from maps, it juts from a peninsula into the open ocean, feeling like the very end of the world. For over a century, its shifting light and shoreline quietly attracted the country's finest painters, who returned again and again to capture the glow on these rocks. The village itself follows the rhythm of the tides rather than the clock. Lobster boats leave before dawn, traps are hauled through any weather, and nothing waits for anyone. Rising costs, however, are slowly pushing out the very families who built this place, making the harbour that defines Port Clyde harder to sustain for those who work it. The waters near Port Clyde give way to the rocky point that holds Marshall Point Lighthouse, standing watch over the Atlantic horizon. Built to guide sailors through notoriously trap-laden ledges and sunken rocks, this tiny beacon has been protecting mariners for generations. The original light ran on lard oil lamps, essentially giant candles, and countless sailors trusted their lives to that flicker every night. The fog bell that once warned ships in zero visibility weighed over 1,000 pounds and had to be wound by hand like a giant grandfather clock by the sea. Over time, the bell was replaced by a foghorn and then automated systems, but the waters it warned about remained just as dangerous. Today, most know the lighthouse from a movie scene where Forrest Gump ends his run on the wooden walkway, then turns and keeps going. Further up the coast, the view transforms at the Penobscot River, where Fort Knox and the Penobscot Narrows Bridge stand for very different reasons. Fort Knox was built to protect the river from naval invasion. Whoever controlled the Penobscot controlled Maine's timber, trade, and interior. Amazingly, it was never attacked, standing as a proof to both its design and sheer presence. Its granite walls, tunnels, and cannon positions remain so well preserved that it feels like the builders just stepped out and never returned. Right beside it, the Penobscot Narrows Bridge houses a public observatory inside one of its towers, offering sweeping views of the river, the fort, and the bay. From up there, the full panorama comes into focus, with Penobscot Bay stretching to the horizon, dotted with islands, threaded with sailboats, and still running almost entirely on lobster. The cold, nutrient-filled waters here make it one of the most productive lobster grounds on the planet. Some islands are home to year-round communities, others are privately owned, and a few have been abandoned so long that forest has completely reclaimed them. Every colonial power that touched this coast quickly realised the bay's strategic value. Whoever controlled it controlled trade, timber, and access to the interior. Sadly, the indigenous Penobscot people, long stewards of these waters, were forced from their lands by waves of colonial settlement, broken treaties, and policies that left their territory nearly vanished. Continuing along the coast, the towns grow older and the history heavier, and just ahead lies Castine, a small town whose past reads less like everyday life and more like a war report. Over the centuries, Castine changed hands between the French, English, Dutch and Americans so many times that keeping count is genuinely difficult. During the Revolution, a failed American attempt to retake the town became one of the nation's greatest naval defeats. Despite all these upheavals, Castine's old streets and buildings remain remarkably intact, standing quietly as if none of it ever happened. The streets are lined with tall elm trees and white clapboard houses that look almost too perfect, like a movie set. In the forests of northern Maine, Baxter State Park sits at the centre of it all, raw and remote, with no paved roads or shortcuts. If you want in, you earn it. Strangely, this park wasn't created by any government. One man bought the land piece by piece and handed it over with one firm condition: keep it forever wild. At the far end of all that untamed land, something enormous has been waiting: Mount Katahdin. A lake rests at the mountain's base, still and glassy, perfectly framing the peak above, as if the mountain is admiring its own reflection. Katahdin means the Great Mountain, and it was long considered sacred ground, guarded by Pomola, a spirit with a moose's head, eagle's wings, and absolutely zero patience for visitors. The weather here mirrors it, with sunshine one moment and freezing winds and ice the next, sometimes all within the same hour. And yet, hikers come from everywhere to finish here, at the northern end of the Appalachian Trail. But while the hikers celebrate, something else has been quietly watching from the tree line: a black bear, completely unbothered, going about its day. Here they eat almost anything: berries, insects, roots, the occasional deer, and even your unattended trail mix if you're not paying attention. As autumn arrives, they shift into a non-stop feeding frenzy, stuffing themselves for hours each day to survive the winter, the world's most committed meal prep. They don't fully hibernate, slipping into a light sleep where the body slows but can snap awake in seconds if something feels off. Mothers give birth inside the den midwinter, raising cubs born completely blind and no bigger than a can of soda, without ever stepping outside. Sadly, bears that get too comfortable around hikers lose their fear of people, and once that happens, it rarely ends well for them. Still, in the wild they mostly scratch and claw tree trunks, not out of aggression, but to mark territory, leaving signals other bears can read like a notice board. And those signals matter, because somewhere farther in these same woods, a predator far quieter and far more precise has already picked up on every movement: the Canada lynx. It looks like a house cat taken way too seriously. Tufted ears, a short tail, and enormous snowshoe-like paws made for walking on thick snow, while everything else sinks. Its life revolves around the snowshoe hare, which makes up most of its diet. When hares flourish, lynx do too, and when hares crash, lynx numbers drop just as quickly. It hunts alone, always alone, no pack, no partner, moving through the trees in complete silence before a short, explosive chase that ends in seconds. Females raise their kittens solo through the brutal Maine winter, teaching them to hunt before the next cold season arrives, because there is simply no margin for delay. Sadly, the Canada lynx is listed as threatened in the country, with warming winters and shrinking forests quietly eroding everything it depends on. The forests of Baxter hold their secrets well, yet Maine keeps another kind of wild entirely, one surrounded not by trees but by open ocean, Matinicus Island. This is the most remote inhabited island on the eastern seaboard, with no traffic lights, no police, no daily ferry, just a windswept rock far out in the Gulf. It basically runs itself. With residents following their own unwritten rules for so long that outsiders who push too hard tend to regret it, earning the island the nickname Pirate Island. But wild takes many forms, and not far from the coast, tucked out of sight, it's time for something quieter, cooler, and hidden in plain sight. Toby Falls. Most waterfalls fall straight down, but this one slides at a sharp angle over smooth black rock, like nature built its own waterslide and forgot to charge admission. Below the main drop, the stream carved a plunge pool surrounded by sculpted rock formations, holes and grooves worn slowly and patiently over time. Not every corner of Maine is wild. Some of it is deliberately charming, like Kennebunkport, a polished, picture-perfect coastal town. It looks almost too good to be real. White houses, flower boxes, lobster shacks and sailboats in the harbour, like someone arranged them on purpose. Beneath that polish, the town has strong roots, with shipbuilders once launching some of the most respected wooden vessels on the Atlantic coast, long before the boutiques moved in. It sounds crazy, but Kennebunkport has been a tourist destination for so long that the tourism itself is now part of its history. The lobster rolls here are treated less like fast food and more like a civic duty, with locals debating the best one with unusually fierce passion. The same coastline that made this town famous is now under threat, with stronger storm surges and waterfront properties sitting closer to the water than anyone planned. Just down the road is the quieter, older and far less decorated side of town, Cape Porpoise. The harbour lies between small rocky islands, keeping the water almost perfectly still, even when the open Atlantic just beyond it is anything but. At the entrance, Goat Island Lighthouse rises, a small white tower on a treeless island, visible from the pier but completely cut off from the mainland. Nearby, the houses are saltbox style, low, plain, and built to take a beating from the wind rather than to be admired from the street. Unluckily, this working waterfront is slowly shrinking, as rising property values replace fish houses and trap yards with nicer looking but far less meaningful developments. Further out along the coast, another island waits, even more cut off, even more committed to staying exactly as it is, Monhegan Island. No cars, no paved roads, just dirt paths, wooden buildings, and just the Atlantic on all sides. This tiny island was a trading hub long before the Pilgrims, and a Monhegan trader taught the native leader to say, "Welcome, Englishmen." Celebrated painters have long come here specifically to work, drawn by the cliffs, the light, and the fact that absolutely nobody will bother them. Every autumn, thousands of migrating birds blown off course over the open ocean land here, exhausted, disoriented, and very glad to find solid ground. But one bird outshines them all, never rests, lives on the open water, and looks nothing like an ordinary one, the Atlantic puffin. It looks like a penguin and a parrot had a disagreement, and both won. Black and white body, enormous colourful beak, and an expression of permanent mild confusion. That beak can hold a jaw-dropping number of small fish at once, all lined up neatly, caught one by one without dropping a single one, a trick no other bird quite manages. Surprisingly, for a bird that looks so awkward on land, they are fast in the air, wings beating frantically as if embarrassed by how they look. They spend almost their entire lives at sea, sleeping and eating on the water, coming to land only once a year to breed, as if solid ground were an occasional inconvenience. Out at sea, they gather in large rafts, hundreds bobbing together on the surface, completely unbothered, which is oddly relatable. During courtship, pairs rub their beaks together in a behaviour called billing, which sounds adorable until you realise it's essentially their entire romance. They mate for life, dig the same burrow year after year, and reunite with the same partner each spring, as if they never left. Sadly, puffins were nearly wiped from this area entirely, hunted for feathers and eggs until almost nothing was left, but they eventually recovered. From these offshore rocks we pull back toward the mainland, toward a wide, island-scattered stretch of water that ties this whole coastline together, Casco Bay. During World War II, this bay became one of the most important naval anchorages on the Atlantic coast, with warships packed so tightly locals barely recognised their own waterfront. Today, powerful tides reshape the shoreline twice a day, turning a morning beach into a mudflat by afternoon. Disturbingly, the water here is warming faster than almost anywhere along the Atlantic coast, pushing lobsters north, thinning cold water fish, and bringing in new species. Just inside the bay, a cluster of islands sits close enough to Portland to reach by ferry, but far enough to feel like a completely different world. Among them, Peaks Island was once nicknamed the Coney Island of Maine, with grand hotels, steamboats and boardwalk crowds, now replaced by quiet cottages and art studios. Nearby, Cushing Island is privately owned and mostly forgotten, except for an abandoned military fort being slowly swallowed by forest, its tunnels still intact and full of bats. While Bailey Island is connected to the mainland by the only cribstone bridge in the world, made of granite blocks stacked without any mortar and held together just by their weight. And out in the middle of the bay, sitting alone on a bare rock ledge with no trees and no neighbours, one of those forgotten military structures still stands completely intact. Fort Gorges. Built entirely from granite in the style of a European castle on a submerged reef in open tidal water, it sounds impressive until you realise it was obsolete before it ever fired a single shot. Surprisingly, Fort Gorges was never used in combat, built at enormous cost, briefly staffed, then quietly abandoned as military technology moved on without it. This was just the beginning. The bay's real military secret lay elsewhere, bigger and far more dangerous: battery steel. Built into the ground on Peaks Island, it looked like an ordinary grass-covered hill, but was armed with the largest coastal defence guns ever built. Ironically, the guns were never used, the threat never came, the war ended, and the massive fortress was abandoned. Today, hikers walk through the same dark tunnels, often unaware they're inside what was once the country's most powerful coastal defence. Over time, artists moved in, covering the walls with graffiti and murals, transforming a war bunker into an accidental underground gallery. Meanwhile, Chesapeake Island is everything battery steel is not: unhurried, unguarded, and completely at peace. As the largest island in Casco Bay, it remains one of the few true year-round communities, with its own school, fire department, boatyard, and lobster boats out before sunrise. Its first economy was built on stone sloops, working boats that hauled quarried granite up and down the coast, supplying stone for landmarks like the Washington Monument. The island even fought hard enough for independence to formally secede from its mainland town, becoming its own official town entirely. But the calm doesn't last long. Further up the coast, the cliffs are loud, crowded, and entirely ruled by one of the toughest seabirds on the Atlantic, the razorbill. It looks like someone took a penguin, gave it working wings, and dared it to survive a North Atlantic winter, and it accepted without hesitation. They spend most of their life at sea, eating, sleeping, and riding out storms, only coming to land to breed. Their thick bills grip slippery fish with precision underwater, and they fly through the ocean using their wings like flippers. During courtship, pairs rub bills, preen, and loop through the air, and once a female chooses, they mate for life, returning to the same cliff each year. A pair may mate dozens of times in a single month to ensure fertilisation, even though they raise only one chick a year. Chicks leave the nest before they can fully fly. The father jumps off the cliff with the half-grown chick, and both swim out to sea together. Sadly, warming ocean waters are shifting the small fish they depend on, making each breeding season harder than the last. From these windswept cliffs, the ground turns an extraordinary colour every summer, cherry field and its blueberry fields. Maine produces most of the United States' wild blueberries from low rolling barrens with acidic soil, earning it the nickname Blueberry Capital of the World. These aren't grocery store berries. They grow close to the ground, smaller and far more intense in flavour. The harvest is still done with wide-toothed hand rakes, the same basic tool used for generations, unchanged because nothing better has ever been found. Migrant labourers spend weeks bent low over the barrens, hand-raking row after row under the summer sun to keep a beloved export on shelves worldwide. Amazingly, the plants don't need replanting. They return every season on their own, spreading through underground root systems that just keep going. Sadly, warming summers and shifting rainfall are stressing these crops in ways farmers here have never faced before. But not all of the region moves this fast. Some places like Piscataquis on a tidal river have barely changed at all. A travel writer once called it the prettiest village in Maine, and the town has been happily living off that one compliment ever since. Beyond its charm, it was once one of the busiest ports on the eastern seaboard, with ships loaded with lumber and goods moving in and out constantly, which made the town genuinely wealthy. When the shipping trade collapsed and the money left, Piscataquis stopped developing, preserving itself almost perfectly, like a town paused mid-sentence. The town sits right on the Penobscot River, where the tidal water frames the main street so cleanly that the reflection of the houses appears on calm mornings. Residential streets are lined with Federal and Greek Revival mansions built during the shipbuilding boom, wide, symmetrical, and serious looking. Along Main Street, low brick-fronted buildings are tightly packed with antique shops and small restaurants, filling spaces that once handled serious maritime trade. When the preserved mansions and tidal calm disappear, you enter raw moving water and open forest at Moxie Falls. Unlike most waterfalls that give you a warning, this one appears suddenly at the end of a quiet forest trail, full volume, full force, zero courtesy. The main drop plunges nearly vertically over a sheer rock face into a pool below, the kind of drop that makes your stomach react before your brain catches up. Moxie comes from an eastern Abenaki word meaning dark water, borrowed from Maine lake and river names by the inventor of one of the first commercially sold sodas in America. After heavy rain, the sound carries through the trees long before you see anything, and the mist reaches well beyond the base, turning the whole gorge cold, loud, and very much in charge. The energy of Moxie Falls gives way to calmer streams as the journey continues to the Forks, a confluence where nature's currents meet and linger in quiet harmony. Despite its wild setting, the permanent population could fit in a single school bus, yet thousands arrive each rafting season to tackle the Kennebec's churning rapids. Upstream, the wildest part of this whitewater is controlled by a dam, so the river flows on a set schedule. Nearby, the buildings are few, worn and functional, with no charming storefronts or painted signs, just cabins, outfitter sheds, and a general store selling everything from fishing licenses to sandwiches. When winter comes, the rivers freeze and the trails fill with snow, turning the same terrain that hosts summer rafters into a top snowmobiling destination in the northeast. Eventually, the remote rivers and frozen trails settle into something more familiar: lobster boats, gallery windows, and the easy pace of a coastal town, Rockland. Strangely, this fishing town also hosts one of New England's top art museums, showcasing painters who kept returning to Maine's coastline without knowing why. Every summer, the town throws one of the largest lobster festivals in the world, turning streets and docks into a slightly chaotic celebration of a single crustacean. Behind the galleries and festival tents, Rockland is still a working town, and nothing proves that faster than walking down to the harbour. It once shipped the state's entire lime supply on wooden boats, carrying material that reacts violently with water and can set a ship on fire. Today, ferries, fishing crews, and commercial vessels all share the same water, busier than it looks from the dock. Sadly, rising seas and stronger storms are threatening working waterfronts like this one, all along the Maine coast, infrastructure that took generations to build and is now under real pressure. Right at the harbour's edge, a granite breakwater nearly a mile long stretches into the bay, ending with a lone lighthouse, Rockland Breakwater Lighthouse. Built boulder by boulder entirely by hand, the breakwater took close to 3 decades to finish. It wasn't poured or cast. The lighthouse at the end stands fully exposed to open bay winds, winter ice, and storms that make this coast genuinely dangerous. Yet it hasn't moved an inch. Incredibly, it's still a working lighthouse today, actively guiding vessels through Penobscot Bay just as it always has, not a relic. Its significance as a beacon of safety is so lasting that it even appears on Rockland's official city emblem. The breakwater, lighthouse and harbour all exist because of one industry: And just up the coast, the physical proof is still standing: the Rockport lime kilns. Here, limestone was burned into powder that became the mortar holding cities along the eastern seaboard together. Without it, many early buildings would have had wobbly walls. At its peak, this coast supplied most of New York's lime, with kilns burning non-stop. But a fire and the rise of cement ended the industry almost overnight. What survives is rare, the last multi-kiln complex on the entire Maine coast. Sitting inside Rockport Marine Park, their granite and brick walls still intact, and right next to a preserved locomotive that once hauled limestone to the harbour. From lime to lumber, this coastline always ran on what its geography made possible, and that same spirit carried on at the Sparhawk Mill along the Royal River. The river itself wasn't chosen by accident. Its steady current provided free, reliable power, just as people today chase solar energy. Mills lined its banks, and the Sparhawk Mill used that current to run textile production, turning raw material into finished fabric far faster than hand labour ever could. Remarkably, the building outlasted the industry entirely, still standing today as studios and workspaces for local businesses and artists. The further you go, the more peaceful everything becomes, and nowhere shows that better than Lake Hebron. Its location at the edge of the Appalachian Trail's 100-mile stretch marks one of the most remote sections along the route. The lake is popular for fishing, kayaking and canoeing, with cold, clean water that supports brook trout, lake trout and landlocked Atlantic salmon that survive only in healthy waters. Private camps and cabins line the shoreline, passed down through families for generations, making the lake less a tourist spot and more a place quietly kept to itself. The lake makes the next stop feel like a completely different world, where stone walls and cannon ports line the coastline at Fort Williams. This was not just a scenic overlook. Fort Williams was an active military installation built to protect one of the most strategic ports on the northeastern coast. The concrete bunkers carved into these cliffs were not decorative. They were loaded, manned, and ready through both world wars. Most of the fort's original structures were demolished after the military left, and what visitors see today is only a fraction of what once covered the coastline. Ironically, a place built around the threat of attack is now one of the most peaceful and visited parks in the state, and at its edge where the fort meets the Atlantic stands Portland Head Light. This is Maine's oldest lighthouse, built under George Washington's orders as the first funded by the new federal government. It was built almost entirely by local labourers using stone pulled from the surrounding area, with no imported materials or outside contractors. Ships have wrecked at its base, able to see the light but still unable to avoid the rocks, revealing how dangerous this coast really is. The keeper's house still stands, letting you step inside the home, of those who spent years here in near total isolation, battered by North Atlantic storms each winter. In my opinion, it was one of the loneliest, most punishing postings on the entire coast. Remarkably, Portland Headlight never retired and still guides vessels into Portland Harbor, just as it always has. Not far from here, the coastal town of Scarborough sits between two worlds, with open ocean on one side and one of New England's largest coastal marshes on the other. This town was attacked and burned multiple times during early colonial conflicts, and rebuilt so often it practically has 9 lives. Sadly, rapid suburban development has put serious pressure on the natural areas here, and much of what made this coastline ecologically special is now surrounded by roads and housing. On a narrow peninsula jutting into the Atlantic, one of America's most celebrated painters once set up a studio and never left at Prout's Neck. Winslow Homer became a recluse here, obsessively painting Atlantic storms in the studio that still stands almost unchanged, with the same view that inspired his iconic seascapes. Just off the peninsula, the coastline opens into something far bigger and far older than any painting or property line, the sprawling, breathing expanse of Scarborough Marsh. This is Maine's largest salt marsh and one of the planet's most productive ecosystems, outproducing most tropical rainforests acre for acre. Think of it as a giant natural filter, nursery, and flood barrier all at once, quietly working for free with zero maintenance. Twice a day, the tides push salt water through the marsh and pull it back out, the land literally breathing on its own schedule. This tidal rhythm makes the marsh a critical stop for migratory birds from as far as South America, landing here to rest before continuing north. The marsh is anything but silent, with red-winged blackbirds staking patches of cattails and cutting through the morning air with their calls. In summer they hunt insects from marsh plants, prying open cattails, and in winter switch to seeds, forming massive, noisy flocks that sweep through fields like a storm. That red and yellow shoulder patch isn't decoration. It's a flag declaring, "This is mine, and I will fight for it." What's wild is that one male maintains a small harem, mating with multiple females all nesting within his patch simultaneously, while aggressively chasing off every rival that gets close. The females look very different, streaky brown and almost like sparrows, so for years people didn't realise they were the same species. All too often when marshes disappear, these birds leave too, because a drained marsh is no longer a home, just wet dirt. Hard to believe, but they have been seen diving at and attacking animals much larger than themselves, including humans who get too close to a nest, without hesitation. From the cattails and calls of the marsh, the Maine coast leads you to open water, crowded boats, and a town built around the sea, Boothbay Harbor. It sits on a naturally sheltered deep water inlet, protected from ocean swells by the surrounding peninsula that blocks wind and waves from nearly every direction. This charming tourist town was once a serious industrial hub, launching wooden vessels that worked the coast and carried cargo well beyond Maine waters. Its population soars every summer as the town fills with visitors, completely changing its pace. But seasonal demand has raised property values so much that many fishing families who built the town can no longer afford to live there. Lies just south, Southport Island is connected to the mainland by a swing bridge across the narrow waterway and moves at a completely different rhythm. It is a true island community where the surrounding water shapes everything, from getting supplies to facing the weather to feeling truly isolated. Its shoreline is classic Maine: rocky ledges, spruce trees reaching the water, and tidal pools that refill twice daily with whatever the Atlantic brings. Southport has almost no tourist infrastructure compared to its neighbour, with no commercial strips and just a few quiet spots locals actually use. Despite being minutes from one of region's busiest harbours, it has stayed quiet, avoiding the development that changed its neighbour. Eventually, the coast delivers exactly what most people came looking for: wide, sandy beaches, warm summer energy, and the easy, unhurried charm of Ogunquit. Its name comes from the Abenaki language and means beautiful place by the sea, which feels perfectly accurate. Even so, it was an artist's colony long before it became a beach town, with painters drawn to its coastal light and the meeting of river, marsh, and ocean. The town itself is tiny and almost entirely walkable, so most visitors park once and never need a car again. In winter, the town essentially goes to sleep, with most restaurants, shops, and hotels closing completely. Nearby Ogunquit Beach has soft, fine sand, unlike the surrounding rocky and gravelly coast, giving the shoreline a completely different feel. That sand never stays still. Tides, storms, and currents reshape it each season, so the beach looks different every year. What makes it unusual is the tidal river, creating a warm, shallow lagoon on one side and the open Atlantic on the other, offering two very different swims within walking distance. Think of it as two beaches in one cold and dramatic, the other warm and gentle, separated by nothing more than a narrow strip of sand and a tidal river. Just around the corner, the coastline narrows into a small, intimate spot with wooden docks, lobster buoys, and the smell of fresh seafood at Perkins Cove. It began as a simple fishing operation, then galleries and restaurants arrived, turning it into one of southern Maine's most photographed spots. Some lobster boats still operate from these docks, quietly holding on to the cove's original purpose, now with a coffee shop next door. Above the water, along the rocky cliffs from the cove, is one of New England's most celebrated short walks, the Marginal Way. This path was privately owned for most of its history. A local resident bought it to keep it open and donated it so it could never be closed or built on. The trail runs along the cliff edge with the Atlantic crashing below, so a big wave on a stormy day can reach you unexpectedly. Further west, past the beaches and harbours, the lakes grow larger, the forests grow quieter, and the mountains take over at Rangeley. Its waters were famous for fishing, ranked among the world's best for brook trout, attracting anglers much as Patagonia does today. At the centre of it all, holding the region together, is the lake that gave the town its name and its identity, Rangeley Lake. It sits at a high elevation for a lake this size, cold and clear, fed mostly by snowmelt and rain, fed primarily by snowmelt, rainfall, and small cold stream. That water makes this lake ideal for landlocked Atlantic salmon and brook trout, which survive here naturally. Sadly, invasive aquatic species in the nearby waters remain a constant threat, and one wrong introduction could permanently change everything that makes this lake exceptional. Right above the lake, the mountains that frame this region rise sharply, with one peak defining the skyline more than any other, Saddleback Mountain. Its summit, one of the few above the tree line, is fully exposed with open sky, wind, wide forest views, and far more snow than the town below. Once dormant as a ski resort, with overgrown trails and rusting lifts, it was later revived, becoming one of the few major northeast ski mountains to recover from near closure. From here, the western mountains stretch on, and carved through them by glaciers and framed by cliffs is one of the region's most dramatic natural passages, Grafton Notch State Park. A notch is a valley cut so sharply that its walls rise nearly vertically, creating a corridor that feels like walking inside a mountain. Despite its dramatic scenery, much of the park remains surprisingly accessible, with glacial features visible from a roadside path and walkable in regular shoes. Shorter trails include wooden boardwalks and staircases built into the rock, guiding visitors through narrow gorges and cave-like passages. The park sits just minutes from Sunday River Ski Resort, where the same mountains draw skiers in winter and hikers in summer, keeping nearby cabins and lodges busy year-round. Rising visitor numbers are leaving their mark, wearing down trails and delicate features that formed over a very long time. One of the park's most immediately stunning sights is Screw Auger Falls, where the river carves smooth channels into exposed granite. Its name comes from the spiral twist the water makes as it winds through narrow, rock-worn passages, looking almost machine-made. The river slowly ground the rock with sand and pebbles, creating smooth channels and pools that made the falls a popular swimming spot. Beyond the park in Franklin County, the water takes on a new character at Smalls Falls, cascading through stacked drops in a narrow gorge. Pools between the falls stay cold and clean, even in midsummer, so they are a popular spot for a swim. The falls are easy to reach from the road, yet their scale feels immense, and heavy foot traffic with no protection is taking a toll. From here, the route moves deeper into the state, toward a town with a wilder, louder, and far more outrageous history, Bangor. At its peak, it was the world's largest lumber port, with logs floated down the Penobscot River, cut at over 100 sawmills, and shipped worldwide. That timber boom built a city of grand Victorian mansions almost overnight, many still standing, including one owned by the most famous horror writer, Stephen King. Surprisingly, it went from ruling the global timber trade to becoming a small, quiet city. The road heads south toward Maine's largest and most cosmopolitan city, one that swapped sawdust for seafood and never looked back: Portland. Tiny by city standards, it nonetheless boasts more restaurants per person than almost anywhere else in the country, outpacing cities many times its size. Some reports even claim it has more eateries per resident than San Francisco, a city famous worldwide for its food scene. That obsession makes sense. Portland sits on one of the most productive stretches of Atlantic coastline, with lobster, oysters, and fresh fish going straight from the water to the kitchen. Crossing into the city, the Casco Bay Bridge immediately stands out. Maine's largest movable drawbridge, opening daily for oil tankers and cargo ships passing to the inner harbour. The city itself has burned to the ground more than once, with fires tearing through the wooden city repeatedly, one of the worst sparked by a stray firecracker on a national holiday. Each time the city rebuilt faster and grander, leaving the brick Victorian buildings of the old port as a legacy of fire-forcing reinvention. Today, that same waterfront identity faces new pressures from rising sea levels and increasingly severe storms threatening the very docks that built the city. Watching over the harbour is one of the region's most overlooked structures, the Portland Observatory, the last surviving maritime signal tower of its kind in the country. Before radar or radio, the tower handled all city communication. A watchman spotted incoming ships, read their flags, and signalled the merchant to prepare the dock before arrival. What's remarkable is how it was funded. Merchants paid a subscription to use the service, making it one of the earliest pay-per-use communication networks in the country. Just down the waterfront, another structure has been keeping its own quiet watch over the harbour. Smaller, sturdier, and just as storied, the Portland Breakwater Lighthouse. Known as bug light, it appears more decorative than functional, yet for over a century, it was the first sight sailors saw when approaching Portland by sea. Perched at the tip of a stone breakwater in Casco Bay, it stands fully exposed, enduring the full force of North Atlantic storms. Nearly lost to decay, the lighthouse was fully restored by locals, without federal assistance. Above the bay, it's common to spot one of Maine's most commanding residents riding the coastal winds, the bald eagle. Once nearly wiped out across the country, pesticides thinned their eggshells so badly that many cracked under a sitting parent before hatching. After the chemical was banned, populations rebounded dramatically, and Maine now holds one of the densest nesting groups on the entire east coast. Along this coastline, eagles often skip the hard work and steal fish directly from ospreys mid-flight, running what amounts to an airborne robbery operation. Still, every attack carries risk, because a fish too heavy to lift can pull the bird into the water and drown it. For such a powerful symbol, the bald eagle has a surprisingly weak, high-pitched whistle. Because of that, Hollywood often replaces its call with the scream of a red-tailed hawk, since the real sound resembles a squeaky toy more than a national emblem. During courtship, a male and female lock talons mid-air and spiral toward the ground before separating at the last moment. Once paired, they mate for life, returning to the same nest in the same tree year after year, sometimes for decades. Over time, the pair keeps adding sticks and branches until the structure can weigh as much as a small car. Despite this recovery, coastal birds still face threats from lead poisoning after scavenging carcasses left by hunters using lead ammunition. Leaving the birds to patrol the bay, the route moves up the coast to a calmer stretch where fishing boats still outnumber tourists. Korea. Long before lobster traps, the Passamaquoddy people fished these cold shores, where life has always revolved around the catch. The village name, Korea, reportedly came from nothing more than a post office needing a label, and it stuck. A Hollywood crew once filmed the local fishermen, calling it Lobster Town, making it one of America's few working fishing villages with a documentary. The harbour itself remains fully working, with barely any room for visiting boats. The dock belongs to a lobster co-op, and if you're not buying, you're essentially in the way. Houses here are cedar shingled and quietly well kept. No boutique storefronts, no ornamental trim, just homes built by people who rise before sunrise and smell of salt water by noon. Water has always been the force behind places like this, and that force does not stop at the harbour's edge. It carries on, all the way to the Piscataquis River. Piscataquis comes from the Abenaki language and means "at the little branch river," a humble name for a river that can swallow whole towns when it floods. When spring rain and snowmelt hit at the same time, this river rises faster than most people can pack their bags. When the water settles, moose wade in the shallows, bald eagles circle overhead, and it seems like nothing dramatic ever happened. Every autumn, the surrounding forest ignites in colour so intense that the whole river corridor turns into a mirror of red and orange. The water literally reflects the season back at you. In winter, the river freezes solid, creaking under its own weight and turning the corridor into a trail of ice. The forest along this river is one of the most intact boreal woodlands left, with spruce, fir and cedar pressing so close to the water the canopy nearly meets overhead. This river eventually feeds into bigger water, and that bigger water has its own guardian, a lighthouse on a small island called Perkins Island. Positioned in the middle of the Kennebec River, the island forces every ship heading in or out to pass right by it. The island sits at a point where tidal currents push in from the coast and river current pushes back out, creating a constant tug-of-war in the water. Its lighthouse is among the rarest designs on the entire eastern seaboard. The tower rises directly from the roof of the keeper's house, rather than standing beside it. That unusual layout wasn't a flourish of creativity. The island is simply too small to build separately. From this solitary light on the river, the way turns south to a place built entirely for fun, Old Orchard Beach. Stretching 7 miles, the sand is wide enough in summer to hold more people than some small countries. One of its most iconic features is the Old Orchard Beach Pier, a grand wooden pleasure pier jutting out over the Atlantic, as if daring the ocean to knock it down. The Atlantic has tried, battering, burning, and partially destroying it many times, but each time the town rebuilt it. Adding a unique twist, many summer visitors come from Quebec, making this one of the most French-speaking beach towns, and locals affectionately call it Little Canada. Beyond the rides and shoreline lies quieter water at Deer Isle, where the ferry matters more than the Ferris wheel. Shrouded in persistent fog, locals measure summer by how many clear days appear, far fewer than mainlanders would guess. The coastline is jagged and fractured by coves, inlets and peninsulas, so walking its true edge would cover far more distance than the island appears to have on a map. Deer Isle granite is famously pink, a rare hue from its unique mineral mix, giving buildings and shoreline a warm, almost otherworldly tone. Structures here seem to grow from the rock, with weathered shingles, low roofs and granite foundations blending seamlessly into the coast. Flooded pits left by the collapsed quarry industry have become some of the area's eerily beautiful swimming holes. At the island's southern tip, that energy is strongest in Stonington, where Maine's maritime tradition is still alive and working. Originally a quiet fishing settlement called Green's Landing, the town grew into a busy industrial port after granite quarrying took off. Workers arrived from Italy, Scotland and Sweden, turning Stonington into a lively boomtown with saloons open around the clock. When the quarry boom ended, many left, but the Lobster remained, anchoring the town's identity. Now Stonington is Maine's largest lobster port, landing more lobster by weight than any other port, year after year. Alongside the working docks and bait shops, galleries and studios have quietly taken root, blurring the line between lobster and art. Just offshore, Crotch Island holds the remains of a busy quarry that shaped the town with its granite. The stone is a fine-grained pinkish-grey granite, so distinctive that architects specifically requested it for some of the nation's most prominent buildings and monuments. Workers literally cut up the island, shipping stone to cities that often didn't know its origin. The operation functioned like a small industrial city, with equipment, housing and supply lines packed onto a rock barely visible from the mainland. When cheaper materials replaced granite, the quarry shut down, leaving rusted machinery, stone walls and flooded pits frozen in place. In a strange twist, the more granite was removed, the smaller the island became. Those flooded pits are now so clear and cold, they resemble mountain lakes more than abandoned industrial sites, with nature quietly reclaiming what industry left behind. From this island that gave so much of itself, the Kennebec River leads to a place built on power and politics. Augusta, Maine's capital. Augusta quietly stands out as one of the smallest state capitals, a city the size of a mid-sized college town running an entire state. The larger city of Portland was passed over as capital because Augusta sat at the navigable end of the Kennebec River when water access was everything. At its centre, watching over every decision the state has ever made, stands the building that has defined Augusta for nearly 2 centuries, the Maine State House. It was built almost entirely from granite, quarried a few miles down the Kennebec River, with Maine literally using itself to build its capital. The original dome was made of wood, which was risky for a lasting building, so it was replaced with copper that now glows green against the sky. The copper dome is topped by a gilded pine cone, not an eagle, to show that Maine is the largest timber-producing state in the East. Leaving this granite seat of government behind, you arrive at the nation's easternmost town, where the sunrise comes first, Lubec. The town sits across a narrow channel from Canada, so close you could practically shout across it. That channel was once lined with sardine canneries, making this small corner the birthplace and capital of the American sardine industry. When the industry collapsed, it went from global powerhouse to one of the most economically struggling towns on the Maine coast. What remains is a raw, windswept coastline that has drawn artists and photographers for decades. The tidal range here is among the highest in the world, with water rising and falling so dramatically that the ocean floor is exposed and then swallowed twice a day. Water Street, the town's main drag, features weathered storefronts, a smokehouse museum, a brewery, and a granite wave sculpture honouring over 100 local fishermen lost at sea. In the town of Lubec, West Quoddy Head rises over the Atlantic, marking the easternmost edge of the continental United States. Quoddy means fertile and beautiful place, in the Passamaquoddy language, a fitting name for a windswept cliff at the edge of the country. Its lighthouse is the only candy-striped one in the nation, with red and white bands stacked from top to bottom, looking more like it dressed for a party than a navigational aid. Bold stripes made practical sense, helping sailors spot it through the thick fog the Bay of Fundy seems to make constantly. One of the first stations in the country to install a fog bell, it relied on sound as well as light to guide ships through the wall of white that often swallowed the headland. Coastal erosion is slowly eating away at the point, and scientists predict West Quoddy Head will become an island within a few centuries. At this wind-battered point where the land runs out, the shore opens onto the bold coast, one of New England's most dramatic stretches. Remote and largely untouched, the coastline has no guardrails or gift shops, just cliffs plunging into the Bay of Fundy. Twice daily tides here are among the highest in the world, exposing the ocean floor and swallowing it again with astonishing force. Fog and cold air sweep over the cliffs, keeping the bold coast shrouded, even when the rest of the region is clear. Coastal bogs press to the cliff edge, where carnivorous plants thrive and spruce trees lean permanently sideways from a lifetime of wind. Much of this spectacular coastline remains in public hands, preserved in a way that would be impossible in most other states. The rocky edges of the bold coast gradually give way to the windswept cliffs of Cutler Coast. With no roads or buildings, the only access is on foot, preserving the coastline's raw, untouched character. The cliffs drop so sharply into the water that at high tide there is no beach, just rock face meeting sea. This rock, among the oldest exposed on the eastern seaboard, is fractured by forces so old the cliffs appear broken from within. Behind them, a forest of salt-battered spruce grows low and twisted, moulded by relentless wind and sea spray. Empty houses and crumbling wharves recall the small fishing villages that once thrived here. From these emptied shores, the route moves to a place that refused to fade, a small island that still fishes, still builds boats, and still holds on, Beale's Island. A low bridge connects it to the mainland, easily washed over by storm waves and emphasising the island's isolation. Beale's Island is known as the lobster boat building capital of the world, with hull designs that set the standard for working boats across Maine. Remarkably, thousands of New England vessels trace their design back to this little-known island, where a single boat shape shaped an entire industry. Boat building was never a business plan. It was a family tradition, passed down like recipes from parent to child. The surrounding waters remain among Maine's most productive lobster grounds, sustaining both livelihoods and tradition. Unfortunately, rising ocean temperatures are being felt here, as a community built on the sea watches it slowly change. Beale's Island's edges give way to the open sea, and ahead, Jonesport emerges along the coastline, a town shaped by waves, tides, and generations of fishermen. Its shoreline breaks into so many coves and inlets that the true length of the coast is far greater than any map suggests. The surrounding waters are among the premier puffin-watching destinations in the country, drawing seabirds most people associate with Iceland each summer. Quiet as it seems, it hosts one of the loudest events on the Maine coast, the world's fastest lobster boat race, attracting competitors from across the region every year. The harbour operates on the oldest schedule imaginable. Boats leave before dawn and return with the catch by afternoon, repeated every day the weather allows. The waterfront is packed with lobster traps, buoys and gear in bright colours, making the docks look from a distance like a spilled box of crayons. This harbour, shaped by the sea, sits beside a city where ships that changed the country were built. Bath, the city of ships. At its peak, Bath produced more ships per year than almost any other city in the United States. The wooden sailing vessels crafted here were sold to ports worldwide, carrying the name of this small river city far beyond what most residents could ever imagine. Sadly, the golden age of wooden shipbuilding ended almost overnight when steel and steam replaced sail, and most of the shipyards that once lined the waterfront disappeared. Yet the city's maritime legacy continues at Bath Ironworks, which builds advanced Navy destroyers as a natural evolution from wooden sailing ships. It may sound impossible, but this small city has been directly responsible for warships that defend the entire country. The river that carried all those ships to sea is still wide and tidal, and following it now leads to the water that made everything here possible, the Kennebec River. Its name, Kennebec, comes from an Algonquian word meaning long, quiet water, calm for a river that once carried so many logs you could nearly walk across. Every town, farm and mill positioned itself along this river, relying on water as the only dependable way to move goods and timber. The log jams could stretch for miles, so thick that paddlers often had to carry their boats around them. In its own time, it was the world's largest commercial ice producer, with ice cut by hand, packed in sawdust, and shipped as far as India and South America to preserve food before refrigeration. Where the Kennebec meets the ocean, Fort Popham stands on the shoreline, a historic military site built to protect the river's mouth. Settled by English colonists the same year as Jamestown, this site became one of North America's earliest European settlements, though history has mostly forgotten it. Granite from nearby islands was used to construct the fort, tying this riverside post to other points along the Kennebec. Advances in cannon technology soon made stone forts obsolete, leaving Fort Popham unfinished and never firing a shot in battle. In a curious twist, the officer stationed here during the Civil War later invented Moxie soda, turning a Kennebec River guard into one of America's first mass-market soft drink makers. From this unfinished riverside fort, the focus shifts to the Canada goose, a bird that has claimed nearly every patch of Maine coastline. Once hunted nearly to extinction, these geese now thrive along rivers thanks to decades of careful conservation. Migrating twice a year, they navigate using the Earth's magnetic field, the sun, and landmarks learned on their first flight. Canada geese feed almost entirely on plants, grazing on grasses, sedges, and aquatic vegetation, sometimes stripping a wetland or lawn bare in days. On water, they move deliberately, using rivers and lakes to rest and feed, while keeping one eye alert and the other half of their brain resting. Courtship involves synchronized head dipping, with pairs committing only when fully in sync, the height of goose romance. When goslings hatch, both parents guard them fiercely, with multiple families often merging into communal groups under constant watch. Pairs mate for life, and if one dies, the survivor often remains behind while the flock continues. Each summer, adults molt for several weeks, leaving even confident riverbank birds completely flightless. A single goose produces enough waste daily that large flocks can render wetlands inhospitable for other wildlife, giving them an outsized ecological impact. Maine does not end at a shoreline or fort. It lives in the sound of wings over cold water and the quiet persistence of creatures and communities that carry on. This is Maine, a land of hidden wonders and remarkable architectural marvels. Now, if you don't want to miss the most unreal wonders of Sierra Nevada mountain range, check out this video.